Welcome to R&R Living Life. In this episode, Rick and I make our way further north along the Stuart Highway into the Northern Territory. We have been enjoying the outback region of South Australia, containing some of the state's most environmentally significant landscapes, presenting a 600 million year old story of the Earth's evolution, with forever changing vast plains, low uplands, and extensive clay or salt encrusted lake beds that rarely contain water. To see the vast outback of South Australia, different in so many respects to other outback areas we have travelled in Australia, was breathtaking. What an experience it has been since entering the state from Renmark and Berry, following on to Balmira and Waikerie on the Murray River, then to leave the Murray and make our way to Burra, with so much blowing dust that I wondered if there would be any topsoil left. Thinking we would leave the dust behind, we made our way to the eastern side of the Spencer's Gulf to Port Pirie and Port Germain, with the southern Flinders Ranges to the east, but we were surprised to find visibility limited as we made our way further along the Gulf to Port Augusta. After recharging our batteries for a couple of days, we then made our way through outback South Australia to Coober Pedy, where a very distinctive way of life prevails, and now on towards the Northern Territory border. Sheep and cattle stations dominate the landscape, but we were now passing large mining and petroleum companies operating in this arid land. As we left Coober Pedy, I was surprised by the extent of the opal fields, only to find out that they extend for over an area of about 50 kilometres long, running parallel to the Stuart Highway to the edge of the Stuart Range and covering an area of approximately 5,000 square kilometres. This stark moonscape of coloured mullock heaps featured across the landscape, where people fight against horrendous climate conditions in search of precious gemstones, was fascinating, not to mention the unusual machinery used in mining. The opal fields are pitted with abandoned prospecting drill holes up to 30 metres deep, with an estimated 1.5 million open shafts, hence the warning signs we saw along the side of the road. The landscape is not something that I could have imagined until I saw it, and although I have taken copious amounts of photographs, they really do not do the scenery justice. Some days I wish that I wasn't a happy snapper, especially at the end of the day when I have hundreds of photographs to go through and decide on which ones to include. I have also thought about just taking videos, but where would be the fun in that? As these photos are all about the country we were seeing, I find it hard sometimes to decide which ones to include. The majority of them are taken from the boat as we drive along from one place to the next, so on occasions are a little blurry around the edge where the camera doesn't quite focus. Anyway, it is Rick's and my journal of our travels, so that we can revisit and enjoy it at a later date. I just hope you are also enjoying them. In those early years of settlement, a search for inland seas, lakes and rivers, and the drive for land suitable for arable and pastoral farming had been a driving force for explorers. The settlement of pastoral properties and the possibility of mineral wealth was not overlooked, but those early explorers and pioneers found themselves in harsh environments, most of which were outside their previous experience. The time of year also proved significant, giving early settlers a misleading impression of the agricultural potential of a region. The ants, flies, snakes, dust and heat being intolerable in what appeared to be unchangeable stony or gibber deserts, often described as gloomy, stone-clad and overwhelming. But those early settlers and their descendants have not only survived in harsh conditions, but many, though not all, have thrived. In today's difficult economic conditions with climate change, government policies, environmental regulations, staffing issues, and many other aspects of today's society, it is now more challenging than ever for those pastoral stations and small towns to survive in the outback. We were seeing it from the luxury of an air-conditioned vehicle, not on foot, horseback, the back of a bullock wagon or a camel train, and just after rain in some places. Once a thriving and dynamic area, Sadly, we were seeing more and more places where there had been huge declines in population and diminishing communities, and wondered what the future held for some of them. The Stuart Highway was the scene of almost unimaginable activity during World War II. Servicemen and women were carried up the highway in the hundreds of thousands. Millions of tons of supplies critical to the war effort were hauled up the track, and I wonder what they thought of this long stretch of the highway. It was a pioneer's road that played a unique role in the defence of Australia in its time of greatest need. For most of our journey today, we have been travelling beside the Adelaide-Darwin rail corridor, 2,975 kilometre long standard gauge line, and the lines immediately connecting to it. While the original narrow gauge line is now largely abandoned, the standard gauge line from Alice Springs to Darwin was completed in 2004, and a new section runs from Tarcoola to Alice Springs. South Australia has a long and interesting history with railways. The very first railway line in the state opened in December 1853, connecting the port town of Goolwa on the Murray to Port Elliot, helping move goods between riverboats and ocean ships. It would have been vastly different from what we were travelling on today. We passed through the locality of Mount Willoughby, located on the boundary between the Stony Plains and the Great Victorian Desert bioregion, which supports a remarkable collection of habitats ranging from swamps and grassland to cracking clay pans, spectacular breakaway ranges and vivid red dune country, while the Woomera prohibited area occupies part of the locality's southwest corner. We stopped to stretch our legs at Cadney Roadhouse, just over 150 kilometres from Coober Pedy. What an interesting stop. The roadhouse, surrounded by Waltina Station, is full of interesting history and memorabilia, and is well worth a stop, just to look around inside. I even found a wall-mounted telephone, like the one my family had when growing up, though not sure if this one was used as a party line, where more than one farm had access to the line like ours. We had to listen out for a ring, a long, short, long sound, and then we could answer the phone. There was also a huge python snake skin, one of the biggest I have ever seen. The surrounding Walpina Station comprises 3,725 square kilometres and runs predominantly Hereford cattle with Angus cross breeding taking place, while the country is a blend of open tablelands with Gibber plains, areas of vibrant red sandy soils, sections of breathtaking breakaway country and native grasses. We crossed a couple of major and minor creek systems as we headed further north. It was impressive country that looked so vast and dry, but the cattle we saw were in good condition. The further north we travelled, we were passing through breakaway country, with vast open plains beyond the plateaus and rises of vibrant red ridges opening out at the top. I had noticed changes in the vegetation and was surprised by how green it was in places along the edge of the road where water lay. We passed through Willowbourne Hill Station, a large pastoral lease that operates as a cattle station in the far northwest of South Australia, covering 3,395 square kilometres, with the town of Marla located on its western edge. We stopped in Marla to fill up. There is very little else there than a police station that has also been acting as a weather station since 1985, and the Marla Travellers Rest, best described as a roadhouse, that also consists of a hotel, motel, restaurant, service station, supermarket, caravan park, and is the licensed post office. Lots of hats to wear at the Travellers Rest in Marla. The choice of a rail route through the most arid regions of Australia was influenced above all by the need for water for steam locomotives, and when the railway route was surveyed, it was hardly surprising that it followed the reliable sources of water. The downside was an endless source of frustration for the maintenance crews, with washouts occurring at some locations almost every year, caused by gigantic flash floods that came down normally dry riverbeds, washing out bridges, embankments, and other earthworks that gave way under the onslaught. All but the largest bridges were severely damaged or washed away entirely, and miles of track was washed out almost every year at some locations. Further on we passed through another cattle station, this time Granite Downs Station, that was once a 9,000 square kilometre cattle station, but is now part of APR lands for Aboriginal people and includes isolated ranges and hills and large sandhill plains. We stopped at Toddies Free Camp not far off the highway near the rail line and enjoyed a spectacular sunset and the changing colours of the ranges to the west. When you're in the outback, one thing you can guarantee to be amazing if there is clouds around is the sunsets or sunrises. I thought the sunset was stunning, but the following morning with clouds along the horizon, I didn't give much thought to it being something to make a fuss about. But was I wrong? As the sun rose higher through the clouds, they were outlined in a vivid red, well worth dashing outside into the cold morning to photograph. Though there were clouds around the horizon, we were not expecting to encounter any worthwhile rain. Living in the bush, we had developed some sense of how to read the weather, so were comfortable in our knowledge that it would not rain. Years ago, weather stations were quite common on pastoral stations and properties throughout most of inland Australia. I have been on a couple of places where we kept records on weather data such as rainfall, temperature and wind speed and direction, which was then sent to official meteorological organisations to compile and analyse each day, but they no longer do that today. At Toddies, we were camped not far from the rail line that runs from Adelaide to Darwin, the Garn, that was finally fully constructed in 2001. Construction began on the line in 1878, with Afghan labourers along with their camels playing a significant role in the construction and maintenance of the railway, forming settlements known as Garn towns. These workers experienced unimaginable hardships, contending with the harsh conditions of the outback, with the line reaching Oodnadatta in 1891. The railway didn't reach Alice Springs until 1929. For 50 years the old Garn rattled its way to Alice Springs, sometimes at walking pace, over a poorly planned jumble of broad and narrow gauge tracks. The railway was notorious for its frequent delays, often up to a week, caused by the outback's relentless downpours and sudden flash floods. Despite its unreliability, the old Garn route was tolerated because it was the only one with enough water to power the steam trains. In the 1980s, long after diesel had replaced steam, the rail line was finally relocated to a more reliable route. We were beginning to see more hills and granite country with oatgrass plains. Today we passed through De Rose Hill pastoral lease, used for cattle breeding, covering an area of approximately 1,780 square kilometres, with an average rainfall of around 230 millimetres per annum. We were beginning to see the effect of the earlier rains, with thick buffel grass lining the table drains and the edges of the road. I was intrigued by the shape of the trees, as some were near symmetrical. On a couple of sections of the highway we had crossed very long floodplains where debris still lay along the edge of the causeways and along the fences, as well as the sides of the roadway being washed away along the bitumen. It always fascinated me when I see 2-metre high flood markers on the edge of some of the roads, and can only imagine the amount of water that floods across this country. We had to stop at the border and once again take the obligatory photo as we crossed into another state. We had previously been here in June 2024, but still had to stop. The last 20 kilometres north of the South Australian Northern Territory border to Culgara was past rich red outcrops and paddocks covered in grass, and I am sure cattle producers were smiling at having a great season. Culgara is the southernmost permanent settlement in the Northern Territory. To the east of the settlement is an interesting outcrop of granite rocks, and further east is the railway station where the Garn that runs between Adelaide and Darwin arrives twice weekly in each direction, and the trucking yards, when at its height in the mid to late 1980s, was used to load cattle wagons and transport cattle via rail. However, in the late 1990s, the trains made their final stop as roads monopolised livestock transport. The cattle wagons would carry up to 3,000 head of territory cattle across the arid landscape of the Central Australian desert and into either Darwin Port or the bustling stockyards of Adelaide. Once again, I was saddened to see the signage covered in stickers. Why people have the need to stick their logos onto road signs, often making them unreadable, is beyond comprehension. To make matters worse, it is a criminal offence to deliberately cause destruction or damage to public or private property. It is not just how ugly it looks or the readability of the sign, but also the cost of replacing them, especially in these remote regions, that annoys me. From Kilgara, we continued on the Stuart Highway to Erldunda, the Roadhouse, set on 4 hectares at the turn-off to Uluru, where we made camp for the night. That afternoon we went and visited the emu enclosure, where we got up close and fed those fascinating birds, and from there wandered up to Sunset Viewing Platform. Sitting at the junction of the Stuart and Lasseter highways in the Northern Territory, Erldunda is uniquely situated in an area rich in history of exploration, pioneering pastoral endeavours, cosmic events and gold fever. It advertises itself as being the centre of the centre, though there is some disagreement about where the exact centre of Australia is due to the different methods of measurement, with currently 5 points claiming the title. Apparently the government has determined the title to go to the middle point of those 5 measurements, therefore making Erldunda the centre of Australia. Rick and I had been to the Lambert Centre in 2024, the Geographic Centre of Australia, west of Finke, another amazing experience. Surrounding the roadhouse is Erldunda Station, a pastoral lease that operates as a cattle station. The property was established in the 1870s by Richard Warburton, who stocked it in 1884, and the property remained with the Warburton family until 1920, when it was bought by the Staines family. Rick and I will leave you here at Erldunda for this episode. Join us on our next leg to Kings Canyon. I hope you have enjoyed this episode. Give us a thumbs up if you have. Stay safe and enjoy life. Cheers for now. Rick and Rosemary. R&R, living life.